Well, let's talk to a man who's actually met Vladimir Putin, who's dealt with him at the highest reaches of power. And that is, I'm delighted to say, to welcome to the show, Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, you're joining us here from London. I no doubt you, like many people, glued to the TV screens over the weekend watching these extraordinary events unfold in Russia. And then suddenly the mutiny, the coup was off. We saw Yevgeny Prigozhin slink off to Belarus. Vladimir Putin still not seen. But as someone who's met Vladimir Putin face to face, eye to eye, what do you believe has happened this weekend?
Well, what's happened this weekend is that the Russian war effort in Ukraine has been weakened by this Wagner group mutiny, and Putin's aura of invincibility inside Russia has been shaken by this Wagner group mutiny. So this is very bad for Vladimir Putin, but cornered dictators are more dangerous than ever. And I think what the West has got to do right now is redouble its support for Ukraine and carefully consider what its response might be to any desperate escalation of the war by a dictator who fears he might very well lose. Just on the subject of Vladimir Putin's character, look, I had a lot to do with the Russian dictator in the aftermath of the atrocity, the MH17 atrocity, the shot down of that civilian aircraft with the loss of 298 lives, including 38 Australians. And it was obvious to me way back then that this man thinks he is on a mission from God to recreate greater Russia. Obviously, Ukraine, Little Russia, as they call it, is his current target. But if Ukraine were to succumb, there's no doubt whatsoever that Georgia, Moldova, the Baltic states and Poland would be next on the hit list, because that's the Russia of Peter the Great that Putin lives to restore.
And that is the big concern, isn't it? And it's a point that many of the Eastern European nations have been making throughout. So your argument is that really, we should redouble our efforts. We've still been waiting, for the jets to arrive, a lot of the tanks. Lots of promises are made by the West, but very, very, very slowly, and not enough of that weaponry is there for the Ukrainians for their counter-offensive right now. The big concern, of course, is the use of nuclear weapons. There's concern that if there is either a civil war, either Putin falls and we then have, who knows, it's unlikely to be a Tory Lib Dem coalition government, I think we can safely say, who's in charge. But also the concern that Vladimir Putin, as you say, a dictator with his back against the wall, resorting to something like a nuclear weapon. Is that one of your biggest concerns?
It's been my big concern from the beginning. As soon as it became obvious, Julia, that the Ukrainians were not going to be the pushover that Putin believed they would, my worry has been that he would try to win the war in a day by playing his one trump card, namely nuclear weapons. Now, the last thing NATO should do is respond in like measure should a nuclear weapon be used. But I think there would have to be a massive conventional response by NATO to any escalation by Putin, because there's no way on God's earth that an evil bully should be allowed to intimidate a smaller country simply because he has nuclear weapons. I mean, anarchy will stalk the earth if that principle were ever allowed to thrive.
Indeed. And there's lots of reports that Western intelligence, particularly Five Eyes, US, US, Britain and Australia, of course, included, that would have had some knowledge in advance of this happening. Would that have been something that the Western allies would have been wanting to happen, this attempted coup?
I suppose at one level, any weakening of the regime, as this plainly is positive. But the trouble with a vicious, corrupt, evil dictatorship is that as it gets weaker, it becomes slightly more unpredictable and slightly more dangerous. And this is why, at one level, I suppose it's easy to rejoice in Putin's misfortune, but at another level, his misfortune can be fraught for the rest of us. And this is why I think, in a very calm and measured way, the free countries of the world need to reinforce their support for Ukraine. Australia, for instance, is going to the NATO conference in a week or so's time. I really hope our Prime Minister comes with a much expanded armament package, including not dozens but hundreds of the famous Bushmaster armoured personnel vehicle, also the Hawkeye light armoured personnel vehicle, because this is exactly what the Ukrainians need in strength if they are to drive every last Russian soldier from every last inch of Ukrainian territory.